In this video, I'm going to be reviewing a brand new notebook from the Paper Mind. This is the Meringue Paper notebook. I'll go over the specs, I will do a paper test, as well as an extended paper comparison with a number of very popular fountain pen friendly papers. And at the end, I'll tell you what I like and don't like about this notebook coming up. Just a quick note, this video is a little bit on the longer side, but there are chapters down below, so please take a look at those so you can jump to the parts that you may be most interested in. This is the newest notebook from the Paper Mind. This is the Meringue notebook, and it's our first ever B6 slim size notebook. So this is a really nice travel size. They're available in 3 different page styles: dot grid, ruled, and blank, and they come in 3 colors: gray and black for the ruled version, green and black for the dot grid version, and black only for the blank version. Try to get more of those going. At the time that I am filming this, these are currently available for pre-order. We're awaiting sea freight from Japan. So at the moment, they are 15% off for a special for pre-order. We also have the new dot grid version of our A5 hardcover Tomoe River notebook also on pre-order. Now, if you're watching this video after the pre-order is over, you will be able to get 10% off with code BB10 at checkout. That discount is not available for the pre-orders, but if you pre-order, you save 15% versus 10%, so it's a pretty good deal. Now, let's walk through the notebooks and we'll do some paper tests. So this is a B6 slim size. This is a size that Midori also uses for their MD notebook, and it's 105 millimeters or 4.12 inches by 175 millimeters or 6.89 inches. And it's 10 millimeters thick, roughly, and it will fit in Midori MD notebook covers. I'm also working on having my own leather notebook covers made for the Paper Mind, but as of right now, any of the B6 Slim from Midori will fit these notebooks very, very nicely. In terms of specs, we have 160 pages. That's 10 16-page signatures of the Meringue 65 GSM paper. We have the typical Paper Mind naked spine, just like on our bank paper notebooks, our Dandelion and Tronex notebooks. Very, very nice stitched binding, very, very flexible. I'll take off the belly band here so we can take a look a little bit closer. And we have this Japanese book linen cover, which is really nice to the touch. We do have also the gray color here and the green color. In terms of the page styles, it's available in blank, ruled, the 7mm rule that you typically see on Paper Mind notebooks, and a 5mm dot grid as well. Ribbon bookmark as standard. We also have a pink blotter sheet and the typical Paper Mind gray paste down. And just to show off the binding a bit here, it is fully stitched and it's super, super flexible. You can write with it. You don't need to have it, on a desk. It'll bend 360 degrees. It'll lay flat. Doesn't matter where you are in the notebook, it's going to stay flat. Like if we go towards the end here, it stays very, very flat on the table. So that is really nice. And that is pretty much it in terms of specs. We have a modified version of our foil stamp here. We made it a little bit smaller to be more proportional to the B6 slim size. You can see our Dandelion notebook here, so we shrunk it down a little bit. Now, one thing I want to talk about before we go into the paper performance is the size of this. The B6 slim size is a size that I've really liked for a long time. When I worked in an office, when I was in mobile gaming and I was in accounting before, this was a size that I used all the time just for quick notes at my desk. However, I've started using it in landscape mode, and then when you do that, you pretty much get very close to the same amount of real estate, I think just a hair more than a full A5 page. So you can journal with this, especially if you have the blank or the dot grid version. If you turn it landscape mode, you have basically a full page worth here to write on, which I really enjoy. However, I also have been writing with it, one page at a time, and it doesn't feel too small for journaling. It doesn't feel like a pocket notebook. There's still enough real estate in this 4.12 inches that I feel like I can still get, a proper journaling session out of it. Now, with the ruled one, you can also just go one straight line all the way through if you decide to do that, because the lines are lined up perfectly. I personally just, with the ruled ones, I've been sticking to one page, but with the dot grid ones, I've been turning them this way and doing my journaling in this orientation. And then when I want to take notes, I go back into the standard portrait orientation. So I really love this size. For me, this is, I think, the ultimate travel size, and I've been using this as my primary journal now for several weeks, and I really haven't been missing the A5 size. So been very happy with this size. I think it's extremely versatile and it's fantastic for travel. Okay, let's take a look at the paper test. I've done some sort of loose sheets here, and if we look at the face of this, it looks really, really clean. There's no feathering. We do see some of the texture of the paper coming through in the double broad, but there is zero feathering. If I turn it over, there is zero bleeding. The only place where I maybe see a little bit is on the Pentel Energel in just one spot, but the fountain pens, no issues at all. And then if we turn it over, all of the pens here look great. The Troublemaker pens did come through a little bit. The Copic Sketch, the Stettler Lumo permanent marker, and the Sharpie did, I think fully penetrate the paper, whereas the oil drying pen didn't quite go through all the way. But all the other normal pens, no issues with bleeding at all. This is really, really good performance for not just 65 GSM, but even, 90 GSM paper. Now, what I want to do is I want to compare the writing feel with some other papers, and I have a bunch here. So I have Yu-Sari from Nakabayashi. I just started carrying this at the Papermind. I have loose sheets, and then I have it in some of their notebooks. Their notebooks aren't, as nice as my notebooks, but the paper is very good, so it's something to consider. I've got the Dandelion 80 GSM, Tomoe River S, the white 52 GSM, the Tron X 83 GSM, bank paper. We've got the Rhodia 80 GSM, Blocker, Midori MD, and then the Meringue 65 GSM. And just for like a little bit of padding, I'm going to use this Life typewriter pad, sort of just to give us just a little bit of cushion here. When I think about this paper, and if we just look at it here with these other papers, I think that the color of this is most similar to the bank paper. So it's not the brightest white here. It's ever so slightly off-white, whereas the Midori MD is for sure, a true off-white paper. I would still consider the bank paper and the meringue a white paper, but not quite a bright white paper. And then from there, we have some that lean a little bit cooler. The Rhodia would be the coolest. This is almost the most blue, followed by the Blocker and the Tron Next. Those kind of have more of a cool tone, whereas the Dandelion and the Yu-Sari, I think, are the most bright white, where the Tomoe River is more in between the Dandelion and Yu-Sari and sort of like the Tron Next. It's still very white, but not quite as bright white as the Dandelion and Yu-Sari. So that's sort of where we are on color. Now, when it comes to the hand of this paper, it's a very crisp feeling, even though it's only 65 GSM. It's honestly the most similar hand feel to bank paper. Bank paper is extremely crisp, and even though this is 65 GSM, it still maintains that crispness. Now, it's not quite as rigid feeling because it isn't as heavy of a paper, but you really get that crisp sensation. In terms of the feel of the paper, it does feel a bit smoother than the bank paper. Let's compare it to Next here, which is another coated paper. We get more texture out of the meringue paper there. For Tomoe River is quite a bit smoother, and it is a bit smoother too than the Next paper. The Dandelion is a laid paper, and interestingly, they have kind of a similar feeling, I would say. The Dandelion has more textured. It should be the most textured paper here, and I think that's right. Yu-Sari is smoother. This is an uncoated paper. It's the heaviest paper here. Now let's try it compared to Rhodia. Rhodia is definitely smoother. Blocker is also smoother. And Midori MD, interesting. Pretty close in terms of texture between Midori MD and Meringue. Okay, so now let's go on to writing feel, and then I also want to do a little bit of a Sheen test. In terms of fountain pen friendliness, just in terms of general paper performance, when it comes to bleeding, this paper I think is probably the best that we have after the Next. These are both coated papers, and really with fountain pens, you're not going to see any bleeding no matter what you do to them. In terms of feathering, you do have the texture of the paper here, but it doesn't really feather. None of the Papermind papers feather, but you do see a little bit of the texture of the paper come through, certainly more than you see on Next or Tomoe River. So it's more similar to bank paper in the way that the ink looks on the page. Now, in terms of line spread, this meringue paper has a small amount of it, less than the Next, but a little bit more than Tomoe River. So let's start by just trying a couple of different pens on the paper, and actually I think I'm going to start with this Kaweco Sport in brass here. So we'll try the Yu-Sari. The Yu-Sari is a very smooth paper. It's very fountain pen friendly, and it's uncoated, which is something that I always like. You know, we have a pretty firm feel to that paper. The Next is definitely a softer feel. Now, in terms of the line width, they actually look pretty close. And then here, they're pretty similar. This is definitely thinner on the Tomoe River. So now let's do the Midori MD here. The bank paper. Very crisp. This is probably the crispest feeling paper so far. Also very crisp feeling. The blocker paper. Very smooth, the Rhodia. Dandelion. Nice. Okay, and then finally the meringue paper here. So, in terms of these papers, I would say that the softest feeling is going to be the Next, followed by the meringue, and then the Midori MD. Now, when it comes to like the line width here, to my eye, the Next, the Yu-Sari, and the meringue are the widest. I think these two, let's put them a little bit closer to each other so we can see that there. So many papers at once, this is maybe not the smartest idea. Very similar. Let's do Kaweco Sport. And this is a fine. And here. So with that, definitely the Tronext has quite a bit more line spread. I also think that the Yu-Sari, interestingly, for an uncoated paper, has more line spread. Now, let's compare it to bank paper. Pretty similar. Let's try Midori MD here. They're all very, very close. Now, we'll do this as the control of the Tomoe River here, because we know this one has essentially no line spread. So obviously, this keeps the line the thinnest out of all of these. The Yu-Sari, the bank paper, and the Midori MD are uncoated papers, so they tend to be more absorbent, whereas the coated papers, including the Tronext, don't tend to absorb the paper. They sort of have a plastic finish on top, which keeps the ink in line, essentially. Now let's compare the feeling of our coated papers. Very smooth. The Tronext has more, I don't think it's resistance, but there is more texture to it in terms of the feel. And I should mention that the Tronext is almost identical to Cosmo Air Light. It's just a bit whiter. In terms of feel and performance, this is very, very similar to Cosmo Air Light. I think this has a similar softness to this, but you don't get the same texture feeling. Like the nib is easier to move over the meringue paper than the Tronext paper. Not that any of them are hard to move over, but if there was one of these papers that had more resistance than the other, I would say it is the Tronext here. Now let's go over to a wider nib and see how these different papers perform. So starting with the meringue here, and so this is a Aurora Optima with a Italic nib. And I can't spell italic, wow. Very interesting. Okay. When you start getting into the wider nibs, you know, the difference between these papers starts to shrink a bit. We do still have a little bit of wider lines, most noticeably on the Tronext. The meringue and the Tomoe River here are very, very close. Now let's just take a look at bank paper just for fun, and yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the performance, you know, it's so funny because they look similar, they kind of feel similar, but this is coated, this is uncoated, this has a little bit of cotton in it. You know, being coated, there's some kind of um, plastic that's printed on the top of this, but they really have similar performance. One thing I have noticed is that the meringue paper is more forgiving for edged nibs like the Italics. So, sometimes you can have skipping on this bank paper with the edge nibs. It's not something that is bothersome to me, but I know some people have complained about that. Also similar on the Dandelion, but really it just has to do with the natural paper fibers and the way that a very flat nib catches it. So if you look here, you can see that a little bit, where with the meringue there is really none of that. So yeah, I don't know. I really love this paper. It's sort of like the best of many of my favorites. You get the color in the hand of the bank paper. You get kind of that coated performance of the Tron Next. However, you have less line spread. There's just a lot of really nice things here. It's very lightweight, like a Tomoe River paper. Crazy lightweight. It's not as crinkly as the Tomoe River is, which I personally like, just that more crisp aspect to it. Now, what I want to do next is I want to just do like a sheen kind of test here. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to use Waterman Serenity Blue, which can have some red sheen to it, and I'm going to try it on all of these papers. I'll be using a Kakimori dip pen nib, the brass one, and then I'm going to be using just some Q-tips to do kind of big wet swabs, just so you can see how these papers perform. They hold up to ink and what kind of sheening properties they might have. So without further ado, let's get going on that. I'm going to start with the meringue here. We'll do another pass. This is a lot of ink. Okay, so there's that. Let that dry. Next paper. We'll do the Tron Next here. We're going to wait for those to dry, and then we'll be back. Okay, so these papers have now dried, and the results are interesting. Paper is still somehow mysterious the way that it works, just not necessarily what you expect. Now, looking at these, what I will say is that the Tron Next has like the strongest gold sheen. Like when you hold it up to the light at an angle, the most powerful sort of concentration of gold is here in the Tron Next. However, it seems like it's more localized, whereas on some other papers like Bank Paper and Tomoe River and Midori MD, it kind of spreads out more instead of, concentrating in single areas. And that just, I think, has to do with the paper absorbing the ink, whereas this is probably the least absorbent paper here, which also just gives it that ability to, like, if you wanted to do watercolor, this would be the best paper here to do that, because it can just hold that ink super well. It also has the least amount of bowing and, curving. I will say that the meringue also was right up there with it. The bank paper also did well in terms of the paper not bowing. The worst was the Dandelion. This really bowed a lot. This paper is 80 GSM, but it's actually the thickest paper here, even thicker than the Yu-Sari, so it's a very absorbent. It's the fastest drying paper here, so you kind of expect these qualities. Interestingly, though, it did really well with the sheen. I mean, the sheen on this is fantastic. The Tomoe River sheen is not quite as powerful, I would say, as the Dandelion and the Tron Next. I was surprised, actually, the Midori MD has very, very good sheen. This is, out of all the papers here, this is the least fountain pen friendly. That said, it's still fountain pen friendly, but in my experience using these, you know, you do get little bleeding marks here, which you're not going to see on any of these other papers, but it did really well with the sheen. And, you know, when we look at the sort of more written lines, we have actually very good sheen on there. I think it's actually better than what we have on the Tron Next. So I was very surprised by that. The Tomoe River looks very good with the written sheen. Now, the meringue paper here, we had very nice sheen. The texture of this comes through, again, I'm comparing it to bank paper. Weirdly, yeah, these papers look so similar. They don't feel the same when you're writing on them, but in hand and the way that they kind of handle the sheen is very, very similar. So, very interesting there. The Yu-Sari did very well. We didn't really get much sheening though in the written portion. The Rhodia, I would say this maybe has the weakest sheen. Still some there though, especially on like the double pass up at the top here. None of these papers bled at all, which is really, really good. It's very impressive, you know, 65 GSM paper and you're dumping ink on it and just nothing's coming through. And of course the Tomoe River is even lighter than that. The next thing we can talk about is ghosting. Here's the blocker though for sheen. Nice sheen there. And we do get a bit of sheen on the written portion. Really nice paper. Similar feel to Rhodia, but the blocker is more opaque than the Rhodia, and it's a bit more bright white. I would also say the Yu-Sari is kind of most similar to these three papers just in terms of feel. The Yu-Sari is maybe the smoothest, followed by the Rhodia, and then the blocker there. So let's flip some of these over and we can just sort of start looking at the ghosting here. So this is the Tomoe River here, and here's the meringue, and we can see right away that we have more opacity with the meringue. Now it is a heavier paper, 65 GSM versus 52, so that's to be expected. Now let's take a look at bank paper, which I would say is not very good at opacity. This is definitely a weak part of this paper. And I actually think the meringue is more opaque than this almost 90 GSM paper. So this 65 GSM meringue, I think does better with ghosting than bank paper. Let's take a look at the Tron Next here. This is getting harder to tell. I think pretty close. Interestingly too, you know, you don't feel the pen on the back like you do with a Tomoe River, which is very thin. I can feel the writing, whereas this I really can't on the meringue. These are very close. Very impressive opacity from the meringue. Rhodia looks pretty good. Now this is 80 GSM versus 65 GSM. Actually nice opacity here. The blocker, of course, also definitely, you know, does beat out the meringue. This is one of the most opaque papers, especially for its weight. Yu-Sari, this is the heaviest weight paper here. And interestingly, I don't really think it's any better. I would say the opacity is pretty similar. Maybe this is a touch better. Let's see. I don't know. They're pretty darn close. Yeah, so, I mean, the Yu-Sari 95 GSM to 65 GSM, this is very impressive paper. I don't think that this paper is super susceptible to fingerprint oils, like, compared to other papers I've used, like, let's take a look at Tron Next here, which is very similar to, like, a Cosmo Air Light. Maybe my hands are just dry. I'm not seeing anything here either. Well, anyway, what I will say is for a coated paper, I have not had any issues with hand oils. Now, that's not to say that you won't, but I think this is much more resistant to fingerprints than Tomoe River, Cosmo Air Light, Tron Next. This holds up to it very well. And for a coated paper also, this dries much faster than, for sure, the Next, faster than the Tomoe River, to the point where, I include a blotter sheet, but I don't really think you're going to need that too often with this paper. So let's talk about, I think, the big pros and sort of cons of this paper versus some of the other papers. So I think like the crisp feel, fantastic, very similar to bank paper in terms of that hand feel, really, really excellent. The color is very similar to bank paper. It's, a little bit off-white versus like a pure bright white like the Dandy Laid, but it's also not so, off-white like a Midori MD paper. In terms of opacity, fantastic. This blows Tomoe River out of the water, and it really even holds up to like 95 GSM Yu-Sari. When you write on this too, you don't feel it on the back side, even though this is only 65 GSM. Very, very impressive. Again, good dry times. Some of the best out of any coated paper I've used. This paper can handle any kind of pen you throw at it. It's one of the most fountain pen friendly papers we have. You're not going to have any issues with bleeding, even if you use a flex nib. I mean, unless it's just crazy, crazy scratchy, but I use my flex nibs with this without any issue. Edge nibs are no problem. Now, let's talk about some potential downsides. If you like sheen, this definitely gives you sheen, but it's not going to give you the most sheen. You're going to see more out of Next. You're going to see more out of Tomoe River, and bank paper will even give you just, I think, a little bit more sheen, although they're quite close. Line spread, pretty minimal. I actually find it to be very similar to bank paper, which is an uncoated paper, and that's kind of what this paper feels like, even though it is coated. So line spread, I would say it's pretty minimal, but it's not non-existent. If you want no line spread, the Tomoe River is really excellent for that. It's not absorbent, and the paper and the ink doesn't spread on that coated surface. But this is definitely pretty minimal when it comes to line spread, so I think that's very good. But if that's something that like will really bother you, then you might not like this. But overall, this is one of my favorite new papers. Absolutely have loved writing on it. But that's pretty much it. If there's anything you think I missed that you want to see covered, let me know and I'll try to make a video about that. So what are my pros and cons for the Papermind Meringue Paper Notebook? Well, the biggest pro here is definitely that 65 GSM meringue paper. It is super fountain pen friendly. It is lightweight. It has a beautiful crisp hand to it and a really nice soft writing feel that also has a natural paper feeling to it. It's a very unique combination of properties that I don't really see on any other paper. You get that crisp hand that's similar to Mitsubishi bank paper, which is one of my all-time favorite papers. It's very lightweight, similar to Tomoe River in terms of like the actual GSM weight. However, it is much more opaque and it has just a beautiful soft texture to it. It's also relatively quick drying for a coated paper. Definitely some of the best dry time performance out of any coated paper that I've tested. It's a wow. It's a very unique combination of features that make for a very fountain pen friendly and just enjoyable paper to write on, not just with fountain pens, with ballpoint, felt tip pens, roller balls, a really special paper. Now, I also, of course, love the build quality of Papermind notebooks, the super strong, flexible binding that lays completely flat. That is, a big deal when it comes to writing comfort. I also am a big fan of this B6 slim size. This is a very travel-friendly size. I still feel like I'm able to do, full journaling sessions. It doesn't feel like, a tiny pocket notebook, but it is that lighter weight, more travel-friendly size that I really appreciate. The other thing I will say is I think that these are quite fairly priced. At $26, you're getting a very high quality notebook, made in Tokyo with very special high grade paper that's perfect for fountain pens. The other pro is that we have 3 page styles at launch, which is the most ever that we've done. We have dot grid, ruled, and blank, so that is really awesome. Now, in terms of cons, we are limited on colors at the moment. We have green and black for dot grid, and gray and black for ruled, and black only for blank. So I'm hoping we can do more colors in the future. I also am hoping that we can do more formats in the future beyond just the B6 Slim, which I love, but it would be cool to have this also in A5 size and possibly a bigger size as well. But that's pretty much it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this notebook. If you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you want to see more fountain pen, paper, and ink videos, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much, and until next time.